Welcome to Tending the Flame, a podcast presented by First UU San Diego. In this series, Reverend Justine Sullivan, Reverend Kristen Kuriga, and Director of Lifespan Faith Formation, Tony Bianca, discuss our monthly worship themes. This month, we'll be discussing the September theme of invitation. To find out more about our congregation and its programs, please visit firstuusandiego.org. And thank you for joining us. Well, hello, I am Tony Bianca, the Director of Lifespan Faith Formation, and I'm here with
Reverend Kristen Kuriga, one of the ministers.
And Reverend Justine Sullivan.
And we're going to take the opportunity each month to think about the theme for that month. So we're here today talking about the theme of invitation. So thank you all for agreeing to this. I think it's going to be fun. So I was thinking about invitation, which we sometimes can think about in terms of party logistics, who's going to show up and where the party's going to be and when. But I wonder how we understand invitation as a spiritual practice.
Whenever I meet with a group of leaders and I ask them why they're here, why they said yes to serving in some way. Mm-hmm. And almost always we get to the moment when someone says, I'm here because somebody invited me in. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked me to serve. Somebody said they thought I might have gifts for this work and they invited me to bring that to this task. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, as we think about how we want to grow as a community and even who we are as a community that lacks the gift of invitation is stagnant, right? Like that's part of growth. And I think it's also connected to welcome, The invitation also includes in it how you're going to receive the people once they arrive.
Yeah, and that makes me think about also how will we be changed by the people who come? So that welcome is not just, hey, come and do the thing I want to do the way I want to do it, but also come be part of this. Let's co-create it together. And I think that invitation is like an energy too, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a way of being that's about openness. That's about willingness to be in relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think about even going back to the party logistics, when you're inviting people, let's say, to your home for something, you see your home with a different set of eyes, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes there's the frantic cleaning up, or you see that pile of books in the corner through a stranger's eyes, and it doesn't look so neat and tidy anymore. And you also think about the experience you want them to have. Where are they going to sit? What am I going to serve? How am I going to create the space for them? And though they're coming perhaps to my home, in that moment, it's more than just my home. It has to be a space to receive them too.
Right. There's the issuing of the invitation, but if we really mean it, it should show in how we create the space and what activities we engage in. Are we thinking about the invitees as we create something in order to be truly welcoming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that just makes me think about care and intention. But yes, also that idea of can I decenter my own needs to really be thinking about maybe someone has different needs than I do. Maybe they come in and may have a different experience of this space, this church, this. And so can I be open to hearing or to noticing that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's a delicate balance in that, in the sense that, again, thinking about a party, if it's, for example, my birthday, in many ways I am at the center of that party, right? The party is about me, but if the party is just about me, that's not a very fun party to go to, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've all been to the birthday or the wedding where, there's been no thought about what the guest's experience is going to be. And I think of weddings in particularly, I've been to many where it's been a great experience for the couple. Mm-hmm. But the guests spend a lot of time standing around waiting for pictures, or waiting for the couple to do their rituals, and it's not a very pleasant experience for the guest. Um, on the other hand, if it's too guest centered, then the people who are there, in this case the congregation, is unnourished. There's this balance of ministering to the people here and also creating a space that is inviting to outsiders, to newcomers.
Yeah, so thinking about the why. Why am I inviting this individual or group into this practice or to this space? And am I willing to make changes in order to make space for newcomers? I think about how many coffee hours I have gone to as a church leader, and I would just look at my watch and see how long it took before someone said hello to me, and often it was quite a long time. And I thought, if I were a newcomer looking for a church, I would have left long ago. I mean, because I wouldn't want to just stand around. So can we think about church, for example, as more than just a place to see the people we already know, but can we really extend ourselves to folks that are also looking for a spiritual place to gather and explore?
As our conversation continues, Reverend Kristen, Reverend Justine, and I discuss the different ways that we were each invited into the life of the congregation. So I think as we're thinking about being invited, it just occurs to me that both you, Reverend Kristen, and you, Reverend Justine, were invited here in different ways. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start with Reverend Justine.
Okay.
What is it like to be invited into a congregation, knowing that you're like the developmental minister, like you're being invited to really change the community that you maybe don't even know yet? Like, what's that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it's at times pretty daunting to think about being invited into a community that says, we know we probably need to change some things, but we don't know exactly what, and please don't change anything. Tell us that we don't really need to change anything. Maybe that's what's desired. But it's incredibly humbling, and it's such an honor to be invited into. As a chaplain, being invited into someone's hospital room and being invited into someone's illness and their family. I mean, the sacred trust. So I think invitation is really a holy act, and honoring that is important. So that all of that kind of comes to me as I think about that question.
And do you have a process for when you come into a congregation? Like, what does that look like?
So I really try to listen and observe for as long as I can, because that being new is like golden, because you don't know how things are supposed to be. And I think that's the gift that newcomers bring to us as new community members, right? They don't know how things are supposed to be, so they really just take it at face value, and then it's a chance for us to see, is that what we intend? So things like putting up signs so people can find the restroom or where the worship experience is happening. So when I come into a new system, I try to stay in that newcomer mindset as long as I can, and resist the urge to impose my sense of how things ought to be. The problem with that is that you don't realize you have assumptions until you violate them in some way. So some things that I think are obvious aren't obvious. But I also find it exciting to discover that, like a new language, like, oh, that's how you say that. So if I can stay curious, then that's certainly better than being frustrated or puzzled.
Yeah, it is interesting, thinking back to when I did a lot more event coordinating. We put out a lot of signs when visitors come, and I always thought, it seems to me obvious when I walk onto the campus that in my impression of it, it's not that big. There's a clear, you're going to go right ahead, straight ahead, but people do struggle to find the physical spaces. And so it is interesting to be reminded that I have a knowledge of the campus that a newcomer doesn't, and it can be big and confusing. And
when you see someone trying a locked door and then another one, that's like a metaphor for how it feels to be a stranger and to not, because it's disconcerting to not know. It makes me anxious to not know how something's supposed to be. So an invitation to be genuine has to include that space for allowing people to succeed, like to enter successfully.
And so, Reverend Kristen, I'm just thinking that you were invited first as the social justice coordinator, and then again as a minister. And I wonder what those different invitations. I mean, obviously you were being invited to do something differently, but were those experiences different in terms of how you entered?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I was initially invited to come onto staff as a social justice coordinator, I knew nothing about Unitarian Universalism. I came out of like justice organizing movements, so labor movement and community organizing. And I feel like we were doing this experimental thing, which was to say, how is doing social justice work different when it's grounded in faith and values, in spiritual practice? And what was exciting about that time was that I was the first social justice coordinator, so like nothing had really been built yet. So it was this invitation to really come in and to like learn what lay leaders were doing and to like build something together, to co-create something together. And that was a really exciting time. And when I came as an assistant minister about a year ago, I think about the invitation to kind of show up as my full self in a new way, to really honor like who I was before, but who am I right now? And that both times I entered the system and came into the church, the first thing I asked is, who am I in relationship with, right? And so I started with one-to-ones and sat down and had to sit down with staff and some board members and some key leaders. And what I'm always wanting to know is like, who are you and what do you love and what do you hope for and what keeps you up at night? And for me, that grounding in relationship is like the invitation into real, genuine, authentic community. And that like I need that relational time before I go, and build the programs or preach the pieces. And here's something very similar in Reverend Justine's story about this idea of coming in and trying to be curious, and really seeing like, who are we now? Who are the people here? And knowing that it is like the people that make the place, right? So that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, as both of you were talking, I don't know who this quote is from, but the first act of love is to listen. I heard that in both of your stories, that the invitation to come in begins it, but then there's a process of like listening for who's there and what this new thing is going to be.
So what I'm hearing, that's right, and I'm just thinking about your story, Tony, which I'll invite you to share, but that part of inviting is actually being open to someone sharing more and more of who they are. So we have a sense of who they might be, but then really making space. So for you, you came here as a program assistant, part-time, pretty small portfolio, and you were allowed to grow and offer gifts. So I don't know if you want to just talk about how that felt for you.
Yeah, I was thinking that my invitation was sort of gradual and ongoing over time. As you said, I started as the program assistant, and it was a very behind-the-scenes logistics kind of job. A lot of opening doors and setting up tables and chairs and managing supplies. And then little by little, things came up that, I was invited to do. Like, I remember when something had happened and we were doing a very small gathering in the common room that had something to do with patriotism. And I had just written a reflection about Fort McHenry, where I grew up, and the national anthem that was written there. And the minister at the time invited me to sort of give that reflection. And it was the first time I had been up, like, doing a reflection here at this church. And from there, it just sort of started to build, They needed a handbell director, and they said, well, Tony's led a choir, and, so I did that. And then they just gradually was invited to do more. And at each time, people would say, like, oh, I didn't know you did that, And it felt really amazing to be, invited once, but then, as you said, gifts recognized and just invited to share more of my authentic self. And I love that it's been a really, uh, heartwarming, validating growth process of being maybe not just invited, but invited back. That sense of they really like me.
And as we talk about invitation, it feels like we're really talking about welcome. And we talk about this a fair amount, but I think it bears repeating that as a queer person, I was often invited in name only into sacred spaces, but I had to leave a whole part of myself outside the door. And the first time that I came into a Unitarian Universalist service and realized that all of who I was welcome and truly invited, that was life-changing. And I have experienced that again and again in so many ways. And I think part of what we're called to do then is to turn around and make that same invitation to others, to not just stop with, okay, now I'm in, close the gates behind me, but to keep pushing the gates open wide and invite more people in to bring their whole selves and even to discover gifts and get a chance to offer them.
Yeah, I love both of what you shared, because I was thinking that this invitation really is about this unveiling of authenticity, this unveiling of wholeness, of being able to be our whole selves in community, and that when we change each other, we grow, our gifts expand, and that's really what Unitarian Universalist spiritual community is about. That kind of unveiling of the full self, and the seeing of, and what do I need to do to help create that for others?
And that means taking a risk that someone might do something differently than I would do it, but allowing people to make it their own and trusting that all will be well. So it means letting go a little bit of expectation and control.
In this final portion of our conversation, we talked about how we might extend an invitation to partner with those in the community around us, and also what each of us felt invited to in our own lives and work.
So when I think about invitation, and that we focused a lot on how can we welcome people here and make sure that it's a true invitation and that we're welcoming, and that's certainly very important. I also find myself longing for connection beyond our walls, and can we extend that invitation out to interfaith partners and other UU congregations? Can we share resources, ideas, wisdom, work together, and really feel like we are a community of communities?
Yeah, I think there is a tendency to get stuck in sort of looking inward. How do we grow ourselves? What's going on here? So that question of how do we partner with people, and what are we in? Then what is the invitation? Is it are we choosing something to do and inviting people to join that, or is the invitation to sort of dream together about what we're going to do?
Right, or to ask each other the question, what breaks your heart? What in the world needs healing? And how could we work together to bring that? Could we be more together than we are in our own individual silos and congregations? And I think our youth often are the ones that lead us in that, getting together across congregations for cons. The youth groups of Unitarianism and Universalism actually came together before the Unitarians and Universalists adults merged. So as often happens, the youth are onto something, and we could also invite them to lead us as adults to welcome their gifts.
Yeah, I was also thinking about how the South Bay Food Pantry maybe epitomizes some of that, right? So there was this idea of there was a need, out of our South Bay campus for people who were food insecure. But then quickly, right, people who were receiving food said, is there some way that I can be part of this? And so now when I go down on a Saturday for food distribution, there are maybe half church members and half community members working together to try to feed the larger community. And it increases our capacity and increases our relationship. And I want to be real that that's messy, right? But it can be hard to figure out how we work together. How do we ground it in some shared values and some shared covenant? But I do really see so much potential and capacity when we go beyond our walls, when we do that reaching out, because the pantry is feeding 500 families every week, right? I think about that, and it's just such a concrete way we live our values in the world.
And it would be wonderful to have more folks go on a Saturday morning for distribution and experience that, because it is powerful community building.
So I wonder, in your own lives and in our programs here at church, what you are feeling invited toward.
I feel like I have been warmly welcomed and invited into the life of this congregation, and so that's been just a gift to me. And also invited to help people move toward the values that we all aspire to deal with conflict in healthier ways that actually enhance relationship instead of breaking it, to consider new ways of looking at old problems. I truly feel invited into that work, and I need partners to do it. So it's both a receiving and an offering of invitation, kind of back and forth.
Yeah, I think for myself, in terms of the programs and my work here in the congregation, remember, Kristen, you talked about the sometimes it's messy, and I feel like I am being invited by one of the messier parts of Sunday RE. For a long time we had this very strong but very Sunday school model of religious education on Sunday, and we had 5 different groups going during a service, and there was really consistent, large participation. And now that's different. I think the group is just as large and vibrant, but not everybody's here on the same weekend, and they're not as easily divided up into neat age groups. And so I feel really invited this year to think deeply about what we're doing on Sunday mornings, and maybe figure out a way that looks different. Like maybe at least for now, the time of dividing people up by ages and making it look very much like school Monday through Friday is not the way we do it anymore. And how could we be creative on Sundays in a way that really does what we needed to do, right, to pass on our values and excite and inspire our children and youth, but also recognizes the reality of families right now, which is they may not be here every Sunday, and they've been in school Monday through Friday, and they don't want to be in school again on Sunday morning. And so how we can think creatively around that and design a program that really is exciting and also meets the needs of the people that it's serving.
It also reminds me, or makes me think, that an invitation is really an iterative process. It's not like you issue an invitation and it goes and like hits a net and falls on the ground, but more that it's kind of bounced back, and maybe the invitation changes as the capacity of the person, is considered as well. So that it's more of a conversation.
Yes, and that's something that could be perceived as a failure is also an invitation, right? Like I think there's a mindset that says, I'm going to invite you to this, and this is what's going to happen, and if that doesn't happen, somehow it has failed, as opposed to saying, I'm going to invite you in, and we're going to see what happens.
Yes.
And if it doesn't happen the way I wanted it to happen, that is just, like you said, iterative. It's yet another invitation to rethink together what we want this to be.
Right. So it means being present to what is. You offer, and then you listen to what comes back and offer something else. And
I'm kind of taking all of this in and thinking about, for myself, I feel the kind of urgency of the political moment, right? I feel that urgency and that call for us to be out in the world, living our values in partnership, working for justice and equity. And it's interesting because I simultaneously feel this need for like deeper spiritual practice of like more grounding, more ways to like help our nervous systems navigate in a world with so much chaos and trauma and uncertainty. And I think like my call and my ministry is about embodying that those are not two separate things, right? That like healing the world and healing ourselves are connected, and that these are both incredibly vital and that they feed each other, right? That when we tend to our own souls and spirits and bodies, we're more equipped to be able to like go out and live in the world, in our values, and to collectively work for what we care about. And that collective care then kind of comes back to us. So I think for me, that's really where I feel that call deep into the body, mind, and spirit, and out into the world in ways that are really centered in love and centered in liberation.
Thank you both for a wonderful conversation. As always, it's a joy to talk to you, and I'm happy that we get to share that with a wider audience. It also occurred to me while we were talking that, as you were talking about the invitation leads to listening, that we will be back next month to talk about deep listening. So I hope you will join us then, and thank you.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Tending the Flame, brought to you by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Diego. We hope you can join us next month when we discuss the October theme, Deep Listening. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation and its programs, visit firstuusandiego.org.